I'm a droma. Hey guys, MrPokke here. So right now it's kind of cold, so I'm just gonna be wearing my Anaxa droma outfit for this early access because in any case, with the introduction of Silver Knight, we must of course not miss out the main character for version 4, and that is pretty much gonna be our Elation MC. After using Bro in a couple of iterations with Silver Knight, mainly to replace either Sparxia or Yao Guang, it is pretty clear to me what are gonna be the strengths and weaknesses for EMC, and whether you are fine with using them as a side grade to the Elation Premium 5 stars. So hey guys, MrPokke here. Today we're just pretty much gonna be getting into Elation Trailblazer's kits, Eidolons, team comms, light cones, Endgame Performance, etc. So without further ado, bada boom, bada bing, bada bang. EMC is gonna be version 4's tool to enable Elation flagships, especially for players lacking access to either Sparxia or Yao Guang using EMC as their side grade. You can think of their role similar to HMC in Super Rig, with a more niche focus for Elation teams instead of RMC, who was extremely versatile even outside of Remembrance. Generally speaking, players looking for EMC should only consider using them if they want to play Elation. Otherwise, stick with RMC for general usage, it will still be the better option. So for EMC, in summary, they can provide a substantial amount of buffs for Elation, summarized in the following things over here. Certified bangers at a self 20% on your skill, 10 to Elation teammates with ultimate, and then up to 6 more per ultimate cast with E1 at 3 maximum stacks. You also get 5 punchlines per ultimate plus 3 per attack, which is going to be your skill, basic, or your Elation skill. Your 50% crit damage buff to an ally for 3 turns, and it removes all crowd controls. You also have an instant Elation skill prop for a single unit, fixed at 20 punchlines, which is going to be exactly the same as Yao Guang. She also gains 20 to 30% Elation buff with Technique, 12% Elation 2-turn via the ultimate when you get her E2. You also get +1 skill point recovery with the ultimate, as well as 10% damage taken for 2 turns for all enemies, as well as a decent amount of personal DPS with built-in crit tracers as well as Eidolons. So with all of those buffs in mind, let's just take a look at how their kit actually functions in combat and how they would affect the respective Elation units we have later on. Good news is, Bro's kit is extremely straightforward, which is a very big breather, especially after the absolute mega essay that we've done for Silver Knight, so rest well my editor for this video. So when it comes to the character kit in casual terms, you want to spam your skill as frequently as possible, cast your ultimate on the main DPS for Elation skill plus punchlines as well as the crit damage buff, and then you basically just repeat this entire process. That is pretty much it. So for your basic attack, you're pretty much never going to use this unless you run out of skill points or you're going to be close to your maximum energy. Otherwise, stick to skill for more bangers as well as energy regeneration. For the skill, you're pretty much going to be using this every single time, but not so much for the damage because it's just going to be 60 baseline, although it does target every single enemies, which could be pretty decent for pure vision or specific enemies that wants you to hit multiple times, such as for example Negador. That being said, the main use for this skill is still going to be your faster ultimate regeneration, especially with the trace allowing this to hit 40 energy before ERO, almost guaranteeing a 3-turn if not even 2-turn ultimate if you're going to be using this with units like Huo, despite a 160 energy cost. Now for your ultimate, this is pretty much going to be EMC's bread and butter. You're going to be generating 5 punchlines, 50 crit damage, dispelling crowd control, 10 bangers, and 1 Elation skill instance at a default 20 punchlines. You will pretty much ignore the 50% action value advanced portion, as EMC is almost exclusively used with Elation units, and any non-Elation DPS will still prefer either RMC's true damage and skill point economy, or you can just run a free Sparkle, which pretty much also gives you 50% AV advance as well as all of the different crit damage buffs. Now from the wording from the crowd control removal, it seems to remove every single crowd control and not just a single debuff, which is pretty nice, especially if your units are going to be hit with random debuffs such as DOTs from the Manta Ray, which you probably have experienced in Anomaly Arbitration. Now, one useful tip for this, personally speaking, it is using Vonwag for EMC allows you to take a turn and hence cast your ultimate after Yao Guang as well as Hui's ultimate, which will then allow you to save 1 action for Silver Knight to let Silver Knight cast the ultimate immediately without letting Silver Knight cast a skill. You can see more in this Reddit portion later on when we discuss why you want to run 2-piece Vonwag on EMC. Now, with regards to the talent, this is going to be a very comfortable quality of life to maintain on 3-turn ultimates or 2-turn ultimates as much as possible, which it will include your basic, skill, and Elation skill, which are pretty much going to be all of your attacks. This trace does get affected by energy regeneration sources, bring a skill usage from 59 to 107 energy at 1.244 energy regeneration. And since this trait is pretty much only going to be attack, you do not get a fixed energy on your ultimate since that's going to be considered as a buff. And then on top of that, the additional 30% damage multiplier is a decent improvement on the base 60% multiplier. Usually it should always be 90%, but that being said, this damage would be a little bit higher in practice because you are going to be taking the considerations for the units with the highest certified bangers, and that's usually not going to be your EMC. And then moving on to your Elation skill, and that's gonna be 168% plus 63% for a 251% damage multiplier, which is pretty alright for a sub DPS, and this is also a bounce hit like Silver 9, hence it will perform better against single target or bosses instead of AoE scenarios. Multipliers actually go up by a little bit more, especially at E6, which gives you level 12 talents, but that's pretty much it. And then for the technique, that is, in fact, a dab. So I never want to hear my chat saying I brain rot ever again. Actually, if you think about it, back in my days, that was like the thing. Okay, you know what? Moving on, you might need to reset the endgame for the extra 10% hearty laughter, since it is going to be a noticeable 10% elation percentage for 3 turns. So if you want to get a little bit of RNG, especially for zero cyclers, you're probably going to be ending up doing this quite often, especially for my future zero cycle videos. Then moving on to your major traces, the first trace is pretty much going to be hitting 2200 attack to hit the 60% elation, which should be fairly easy, especially if you're going to be running an attack percentage main stat for a sphere. For the second trace, you get a free 15% crit rate, which is absolutely insane, as well as a +1 skill point from the ultimate, just making it a little bit more comfortable, especially when using with units like Sparksy and Silver 9. For the last trace, you're pretty much going to be using this skill every single time, unless you already have enough energy or not enough skill points, so 2 more certified bangers. Yay. And then for the minor traces, it's going to be 28% attack, 12% crit rate, and 13% crit damage. It would be nice to get speed instead of attack, but crit is still fine. But attack percentage does get converted to elation percent at a cap of 1200 attack, so it is still going to be not too shabby. And then for skill leveling priority, number 1 is going to be your ultimate, followed by your elation skill and your normal skill, followed by your talent, followed by your basic. Ultimate is pretty much the most important part for Elation Trailblazer. Now for the line code, it's actually extremely straightforward because we have pretty much one of the best options for everyone, and this is fully 100% free, and that is the Herda Store S5. So there are no other reasons to run anything but Herda Store S5 because it is pretty much perfectly for EMC. You can see the 40% attack, which EMC can definitely make use of, as well as a 24% elation buff for your ultimate on your main DPS, which is going to be Silver 9, so absolutely exceptional. But that being said, if you are going to be a light spender, and if you have an extra Yaoguang S1 running around, you could consider giving this to Elation MC for more speed, and the ultimate does in fact count as a target on all allies, so you can stack on 2 different Yaoguang light cone effects together for an insane 20% crit rate and 60% crit damage buff. That being said, I would highly not recommend doing this for most players because it is not really feasible. For the free-to-plays, you will definitely not pull 2 Yaoguang S1s unless you manage to get 2 in a single tempo, which is insane. And for the light spenders and whales, you would have just stuck with Yaoguang and Sparks in the first place, which means you're probably not going to be using EMC in that team. So the only group I could see this working is going to be a Yaoguang, Sparksy, EMC, Silver 9, sustainless run. And if you're a light spender, you're going to be going for the maximum amount of crit value, you could consider getting that. But for most players, I do not recommend getting this. And then you can see over here, before the combat, the stats you gain is going to be absolutely massive, from a 85% crit rate to 138 crit damage to a whopping 138% crit rate to 298% crit damage, and that's going to be the power of 2 Yaoguang S1s. Now moving on to the Relics, if you are not going to be using Yaoguang with EMC, 4-piece Diviner is going to be the best in slot because the effect cannot be stacked. If you already use Yaoguang in the same team, then the effects are mainly just going to be for the 6% speed as well as 18% crit rate, purely for stat purposes and a sub DPS. So in that sense, you could run a 2+2 speed for even more speed to hit the respective speed thresholds, especially because you want to be, most of the time fast enough to hit the 200 speed, or the legendary 4-piece Eagle. And if you know 4-piece Eagle, I don't think you need to say too much over here. And then for the planner, it's going to be anything with 5% energy regeneration, either Lushaka or Von Weg, though Silver 9 does not gain any benefit from attack percentage buffs. So with that being established, using the 40% AV advance, Von Weg is going to be my personal preference unless you are using EMC as a Sparksy main DPS support. But for this specific point regarding Von Weg, I'll touch on a little bit later for some advanced elitist knowledge. For your main subsets, you're going to be going for a crit rate or crit damage body, speed boots, attack planar sphere, as well as an energy regeneration rope. And we're going to be aiming for speed subsets followed by our crit subsets. Since EMC does have an attack conversion trace for Elation, capping out at 2200, attack main set on your sphere is going to be ideal, although you could hunt for more combat buffs and opt for more HP or defense, especially for sustainless runs. Energy regeneration and speed boots are going to be self-explanatory because EMC is pretty much going to be extremely energy reliant crit DPS, while the crit rate chairs will make her hits to be way more consistent. If you have enough crit rate subsets, you could go for crit damage, but personally, I'll prefer to have more speed instead of more crit damage. So this is going to be a bonus tip for my advanced elitist Zero Cyclers, and I figure I might do this a little bit more frequently going forward in the future, just a little bit more of an add-on so that, you guys don't see me as a tourist all the time, right? So
the greatest Honkai Star Rail tourist that has ever lived.
So one important thing over here is that EMC usually acts after Silver Knight as well as Yao Guang due to their innate high speed, which means that for Silver Knight's very first turn, it will lead to her using a skill before casting her ultimate. And explained in my Silver Knight guide, you ideally do not want to let Silver Knight take her turn without her ultimate stage due to the bangers as well as the buffs expiring one turn faster. So if you make use of 2-piece one way and let your EMC go before Silver Knight can instantly enter into the ultimate state without casting a skill and retain the bangers as well as buffs for one more turn, which will greatly improve her overall damage output on the very first wave and subsequent waves going forward in the future, which you should be maintaining almost 100% ultimate uptime with Silver Knight. So personally, I highly recommend running 2-piece one way for EMC.
Nice car.
Now, if that we're going to be coming on to the Eidolon portion, and, it's free. So, yippee! For the E1, it's going to be giving you 2 more bangers each ultimate up to 6 bangers, so at the maximum stat, it will still give you 16 bangers. It will be the same expiry timing as the original ultimate, just a little bit more for more damage. For your Eidolon 2, it's going to be 12% elation buff, where you can see over here, Silver Knight is able to hit a 194.4% elation with Yao Guang as well as Silver Knight, which is going to be very good. And then for Eidolon 4, it's going to be 10% vulnerability, which is always going to be very nice. Although this is counted as a debuff, so you do need to reset this against new enemies as well as enemy phase changes. And then for Eidolon 6, when you're going to be using your Elation skill, increase this unit's crit damage by 100%, which is, whoa, pretty insane. But that being established, EMC can do a decent amount of sub DPS damage, so it is not going to be that bad of an increase. So overall, between E1 and S1, I mean, there's nothing to decide. Shit, everything's free, so let's get it. Now, moving on to the team comms after a relatively simplistic kit as well as unit build, this is where it gets a little bit more interesting because EMC will have a position in either a replacement for Yao Guang and Sparksy for Silver Knight, a support for a Sparksy main DPS, or even the upcoming Evanesia. For today, we will showcase some examples of our runs with Silver Knight, but I've talked about this more in my Silver Knight guide, so please check that out over there. And as such, we'll explore the runs between either a Silver Knight main DPS or a Sparksy main DPS with EMC replacing out Sparkle, as well as a couple of sustainers runs with the current 4 Elation units we have in the game. All of the testing was done in full auto, E0 S1, no Eidolons, EMC using her Lycon, etc, so that's pretty much it. Now, with regards to Memory of Chaos, I did mention this in my Silver Knight guide. One thing to keep in mind is that the next MOC is actually going to be less favorable for Silver Knight as well as Elation as a whole due to the lack of free punchlines. But this is going to be way more impactful for Evanesia, which she probably could also make use of EMC. So in that sense, EMC is probably still going to see a pretty decent amount of play, especially if you're going to be an Evanesia main. So the performance for 4 different teams are going to be seen right here. I'll just paste them over here, and I'll just be briefly talking about the 2 or rather 3 main archetypes I've been trying out for myself in this early access. Starting off with the Silver Knight main DPS. So as of right now, this is definitely going to be the current best slot, even when compared to Sparksy as a main DPS with a Yao Guang support. Now the issue with this team isn't really EMC, but it is more so Yao Guang and Sparksy are much more synergistic together with Silver Knight, leading to a situation where it is not too ideal to use EMC in place of either one of them. More details being mentioned in Silver Knight's guide, so once again, check that out. We are also going to be breaking down their exact side-by-side comparison between Sparksy and Yao Guang in a separate video, so check that out as well in the future. Now, between both Yao Guang and Sparksy, Yao Guang does have higher overall damage due to EMC's role as the punchline generator with impressive damage amplification like crit damage as well as elation percent, which was worth the trade-off for Sparksy's punchlines as well as sub DPS damage, although Sparksy plus Yao Guang is still going to be the current best in slot team comp. Now, one cool thing with what I've noticed with EMC as well as Yao Guang is that Yao Guang with S1 will guarantee her first turn ultimate, which will also directly guarantee Silver Knight's turn 1 ultimate due to the additional punchlines in the same team. This will allow Silver Knight's access to her ultimate form 1 action faster compared to a team with Sparksy instead, which is often going to be your slowest elation unit because your Silver Knight is probably going to be close to 200 speed, your Yao Guang is usually also close to 200 speed, and your EMC is definitely going to be way faster than your Sparksy because Sparksy is going to be going for a lot of crit subsets. So in order to achieve this with Yao Guang, you can do this either sustainless, leading to a Silver Knight ultimate first, or if a Huo sustain, you can let Huo cast her ultimate first, followed by that ultimate giving your EMC her ultimate, and an EMC ultimate giving Silver Knight her ultimate, which either case you are not wasting that 1 turn spamming skill on your Silver Knight before her ultimate stage. Now for your Sparksy main DPS, she can still hold her own weight, albeit it is going to be a slight one cycle drop off compared to Silver 9. The performance with EMC as well as Sparksy's difference is not as wide of a gap, since Sparkle does have extremely valuable AV advance, crit damage buffs, as well as the access to S5 DDD for team-wide AV advance. With regards to the actual damage output, EMC definitely adds a decent amount over Sparkle, who does 0 damage herself, but I would say that this is not going to be significant enough to warrant a change if you have no other teams using Sparkle at the moment, unless, for example, if you want to be using Archer in Team 2 with Sparkle, then you can definitely run EMC using Sparksy as the main DPS. Yaoguang over here is going to be really important because there are no other options for your Sparksy main DPS unless you run Sparkle plus EMC, which will likely be a downgrade because you miss out on a lot of damage buffs coming from Yaoguang. And then moving on to my last team, which is pretty much going to be our Sustainers run running Silver 9, Sparksy, Yaoguang, as well as EMC themselves. So apart from MOC 12 Pombo's Wave 1 dealing way too much damage to do we pretty much can't even do a Sustainers run, specifically the Joy Ascendant, I was actually able to get a relatively manageable run on the first MOC, both halves, against Negador as well as Kafka with the punchline buffs doing 1 cycle and 0 cycle dispatch respectively at full E0 as well. Now considering this was done with a full E0 team, the room to grow will be very substantial, which will be demonstrated in our future 0 cycle showcase, specifically with the power of E2 Silver 9, so that is pretty much that. EMC will definitely also play a massive role in the upcoming 0 cycle showcase, so look forward to that as well. Now the key thing for running Sustainers will be the need to run a defensive main stat for your Elation units, purely because the lack of your survivability, because you're not going to be getting any form of sustain from Huohuo. As such, you are going to be sacrificing some attack percentage trade-off for survivability, and for this example, my team's gears were basically unchanged, which means we are going to be running the attack main stat on all units except Silver 9 on HP, but you can see over here, our other units collect very quickly after taking way too much damage from side 1. For Sustainers run, the additional damage as well as punchline generation was very obvious when compared to Huohuo, which frankly has a lot of issues when using Huohuo in the Elation team, namely the lack of an Elation skill, as well as Silver 9 not utilizing Huohuo's buffs whatsoever. In the future, if an Elation Sustain were to release in place of Huohuo, EMC's Sustainers run will have a much higher competition, similar to Hyacinth's introduction to E0 Remembrance, aside from an E2 Evernight running a Sustainers team as well. Now, one cool thing about Huohuo is that Huohuo actually benefits this team a lot because now everyone can make use of energy regeneration specifically for a main DPS Sparksy, but that's pretty much it. So in summary, Sparksy plus Yaoguang is gonna be Silver 9's best in slot, with ENC being a side grade to either units. Yaoguang plus EMC edges slightly due to EMC's punchline generation for Silver 9's ultimate, as well as Yaoguang's personal synergy for any Elation units. Sparksy main DPS is still going to be viable, but if you plan on using Sparkle for Team 2 or have no interest in Silver 9 waiting for an even Nisia release, then you can consider still running EMC as a Sparksy main DPS. Now finally, we're going to be coming to our endgame performance. For this video, we'll be taking a look at EMC's performance without Silver 9, keeping it to Sparksy main DPS. For the Silver 9 results, kindly check out our video previously. I can just slap on this table over here, so that's going to be that. Now for Memory of Chaos, this is going to be more so tailored towards Evanesia than Silver 9 due to the ultimate damage amplification. But that being said, Pommom is definitely going to be still suited towards our Elation units, so it will still be a pretty decent matchup for Sparksy. Now in side 1 against Sam, Sparksy main DPS faced much more problems compared to Silver 9, since her bounce was only going to be 3 targets for an enhanced base attack, which means you are going to be ignoring the other 2 bugs at the side. Now since Yaoguang as well as EMC will all bounce themselves with their own damage, we pretty much need to rely on the MOC buff to deal with the bugs and kill them as quickly as possible. For side 2, 3 cycle is still going to be pretty decent for a full Elation team against an Elation boss. Also, once again, try to use the MOC buff to deal with the mini Pommom so that you can break the damage percentage reduction as soon as possible. Wave 1, we almost had a 0 cycle dispatch, so this could have been a 2 cycle with better gears, while Pommom is just the same mechanic compared to Annoying Arbitration, but with more Elation as well as Punch Knights. Sparkle likely can perform similarly in place of EMC for those not wanting the power waves with RMC, although punch generation will then be slower, which means your damage percentage reduction is also going to be slower. Now, with regards to pure vision, compared to Silver 9 main DPS in the previous guide, Sparksy was also able to do a 40k both halves, although the first half was going to be 1 cycle slower. Now, one thing with this team is that it will struggle quite a bit more in pure vision since Sparksy can only ever target 3 targets with an enhanced basic attack, making the enemies at the side relatively untouched or a very high HP. That being said, going forward in the future, especially if we're going to be tapering off away from all of the elation buffs in pure fiction, I could expect Sparksy main DPS performance with EMC to drop off even further. Now, for A-box shadows between both halves, Spartagon is once again the definite intended elation target, with the second half suffering really badly at a barely 3400 AV clear given how the minions are really bad for Sparksy, as well as pretty much 0 elation buffs. Now, Sparksy did very well for Spartagon previously in Memory of Chaos as well as Anomaly Arbitration. Now she's also doing fine, except the mobs are going to be a lot tankier now because bro is going to be summoning the Chicken Elite. So you can't just clear all of them in a single cycle. As such, expect to spend more action value for this Sparksicon boss fight. Now, the new mechanic is actually kind of bad for Huo for Sparksicon because you should be spamming Huo's skill to get ultimate faster, but as a result, this will lead to you losing stacks to give you rest pen by attacking Sparksicon's channels. So in summary, EMC is going to have a pretty good synergy with the current Elation flagship, and multiple shield buffs allow for Silver Knight to easily reach top performance on top of the fact that we're going to be running Sparksy as a main DPS, so I would not be surprised to also see EMC getting roughly tier 0.5 on a launch. But generally speaking, I would say that for EMC, the buffs are not going to be considered an upgrade to any of the premium 5 stars because we already have our premium 5 stars, right? So you can kind of imagine they released out Fuke and Dahlia before HMC, which I guess ironically you still run HMC and you kill Runway. But that is the current situation we have for the Elation units, unless you're going to be doing those sustainers runs where you can run all 4 Elation units at the same time. That being said, even Nisia mains can definitely look forward to EMC as well, because if your Sparks are going to be using all of your Elation units, then maybe even Nisia might have her own set of different teammates, unless even Nisia is also going to be combining teammates with Silver Knight. So my final thoughts for EMC, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a free unit. So yippee, it is going to be really good for the free players who want to play the Elation flagship. You want to play Silver Knight, but you did not pull for Sparksy and Yao Guang back then because you couldn't decide which one you want to pull for. So for this current moment, I would say that EMC is going to be a very nice temporary solution just to run her with Silver Knight, and then in the future you can decide for yourself if you want to pull Sparksy or Yao Guang, which once again I'm posting out another video for you guys to see in the future. Pretty decent side grade, and you can also open up your Archer for Team 2 if you're still going to be running units like your E1 Archer, such as for example my free to play account. And I would definitely expect to see even more potential for EMC with upcoming Elation units such as even Nisia, or maybe even, who knows, even more Elation units in the future might have more synergy with EMC, for example, maybe Nihilux or Sambo, who knows at that point of time, so it's going to be something in the future. I would say at this point of time, EMC is definitely not going to be a generous support like RMC, much more comparable to HMC, except that even her buffs are not going to be as impactful as compared to our premium 5 stars. So with that, we've pretty much come to the end of today's content. Let me know what you guys think of EMC and what your thoughts are going to be a kit overall and how you're going to be using them in the future. Join Twitch, join YouTube, join Discord, join Twitter, use code POKE with 10% off gamer subs. All the best with Gacha pools. And I'll see you guys next time. Jerome.